Behind the cheerful yellow door of my modest ranch house in suburban Ohio, I spent 2 years walking on eggshells around a man who called me sweetheart in public, but systematically dismantled my independence in private. I was 62 years old when I married Richard, and I thought I was finally getting a second chance at companionship after spending my retirement years alone. But the day I collapsed in the checkout line at our local grocery store, clutching my chest as the room spun around me, I finally understood that love should never cost you your freedom. The paramedics arrived within minutes, and as they loaded me into the ambulance, Richard held my hand and told everyone watching that I'd been working too hard in the garden. That was the first of many lies that would unravel in the coming weeks. I met Richard at a book club meeting at the public library 3 months after I retired from teaching elementary school. After 35 years of shaping young minds, I'd been looking forward to filling my days with reading, volunteering at the animal shelter, and spending time with my 2 best friends, Carol and Susan. We'd known each other since our daughters were in kindergarten together, and we'd made a pact to travel together once we all retired. I just sold my larger family home after my daughter Emily moved to Seattle for work, and I'd bought a cozy 3-bedroom ranch that was perfect for one person with room for grandchildren to visit. Richard was new to the book club that September evening. He was 68, recently relocated from Michigan after his mother's death, and he had a warm smile that reached his eyes when he talked about the novel we were discussing. He made insightful comments about the characters, asked thoughtful questions, and stayed after the meeting to help stack chairs. When he offered to walk me to my car, I thought it was simply good manners. When he asked if I'd like to get coffee sometime, I felt a flutter of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. Our first date was at a small cafe downtown, and Richard spent 2 hours asking me questions about my life. He wanted to know about my teaching career, my daughter, my hobbies, and my dreams for retirement. He listened intently, nodding and making notes in a small leather notebook he carried. When I asked what the notebook was for, he laughed and said his mother had always taught him to remember the important details about people he cared about. It seemed sweet at the time. He told me about his career as an accountant, his volunteer work with the Rotary Club, and how much he missed his mother, who'd passed away 6 months earlier. He showed me a photo of her on his phone, a severe-looking woman with her hair in a tight bun. She was an amazing woman, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She kept the most beautiful home, managed every penny perfectly, and always knew the right thing to do in any situation. I've never met anyone quite like her. I should have paid more attention to that last sentence. Our courtship lasted 4 months, and Richard was attentive in ways I'd never experienced. He brought me flowers every Friday, always carnations, never roses, because carnations last longer and they're more practical. He called me every evening at 7 o'clock sharp to say goodnight. He took me to nice restaurants but always suggested we split the check to keep things equal. He met my friends and was polite but quiet, letting me do most of the talking. He attended my book club meetings religiously and always offered to drive me home afterward. When Christmas came, he gave me a beautiful cashmere cardigan in a shade of blue he said would bring out my eyes. In January, he suggested we get married. We were sitting in my living room, and he'd just finished fixing a loose handle on one of my kitchen cabinets. "I don't want to waste time at our age," he said, taking my hands in his. "I know what I want, and I want to spend whatever years I have left with you. We could sell both our places and get something new together, make a fresh start." Something about that suggestion made me hesitate. I loved my house. I'd only lived there a year, and it still felt fresh and full of possibility. I'd painted the bedroom a soft sage green, hung photographs of Emily through the years in the hallway, and planted bulbs in the garden that would bloom in spring. "What if you just moved in here?" I suggested. "There's plenty of room, and I'm not ready to leave this house yet." His expression flickered with something I couldn't quite name, but it passed so quickly I thought I'd imagined it. "Of course," he said, smiling. "That makes perfect sense. We'll do it your way, sweetheart." We got married at City Hall in February with just Carol, Susan, and Richard's accountant as witnesses. Richard had suggested a small ceremony because neither of us needs a big fuss at our age. I'd wanted Emily to fly in, but Richard pointed out it was expensive and she could visit any time. "We don't want to be a burden on our children," he said. So I called her instead and promised we'd have a proper celebration when she came for her scheduled visit in summer. She sounded hurt on the phone, and I felt a pang of guilt, but Richard rubbed my shoulders and said, "You're such a caring mother. Your daughter is lucky to have someone who thinks about her finances." The changes started so gradually I barely noticed them at first. Richard moved his belongings into my house over the course of 2 weeks. He didn't have much furniture since he'd been renting a small apartment, but he had boxes and boxes of files, books, and his mother's belongings that he'd kept after she passed. "I couldn't bear to get rid of her things," he explained as he filled up my garage with cardboard boxes. "She was such an organized woman. These are all her household management books, her recipe cards, her financial records. She kept track of everything." The first real comment came a week after he moved in. I was making dinner, just a simple chicken stir-fry with vegetables, and he stood in the doorway of the kitchen watching me. "My mother always cut her vegetables at a 45-degree angle," he said. "It helps them cook more evenly, and it looks more elegant on the plate." I laughed, thinking he was joking, but his face remained serious. "I'm not saying you're doing it wrong," he added quickly. "I just thought you might want to know the better way to do it." 2 days later, as I was putting away groceries, he picked up a can of tomatoes and frowned. "This is name brand," he said. "My mother always bought store brand. She used to say that paying for a label was throwing money away." I explained that I preferred the taste of the name brand for certain things, but he'd already pulled out a small spiral notebook, different from the leather one he'd shown me on our first date, and was writing something down. "What's that?" I asked. He looked up and smiled. "Just keeping track of household expenses. My mother taught me that a well-managed home requires good record-keeping. Nothing to worry about, sweetheart." Within a month, every meal I prepared came with a comment. The pasta was cooked 1 minute too long. My mother always set a timer. She never trusted her instincts because instincts can be wrong. The coffee I made was too weak. Mother used 3 tablespoons per cup, not 2. The way I folded the towels was inefficient. Mother had a system that made them stack better in the linen closet. I started to feel a knot of anxiety every time I had to perform a household task, wondering what correction would come. Then came the financial discussions. In March, Richard suggested we open a joint checking account. "It's easier for married couples," he said. "We can pool our resources and I can handle the bills." I'm good at that sort of thing. 30 years as an accountant, after all. It seemed reasonable, so I agreed. I transferred half of my retirement savings into the joint account, keeping the other half separate. Richard noticed. "You don't trust me?" he asked, and his voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. "No, it's not that," I said quickly. "I just thought it was smart to keep some savings separate, in case what? In case I die? In case we get divorced?" His face had gone hard. "My mother always said that a marriage where the wife keeps secrets about money isn't a real marriage. But fine, do what you need to do." He didn't speak to me for the rest of the evening, and I felt terrible, like I'd insulted him somehow. The next day, I transferred the rest of my savings into the joint account. His mood lifted immediately. "There's my sensible wife," he said, kissing my forehead. "We're a team now." 2 weeks later, I needed to buy a new spring jacket. My old one was wearing thin, and I'd seen a nice one on sale. I went to use my debit card and found it didn't work. Confused, I called Richard from the store. "Oh, I had the bank issue new cards," he said. "Better security features. Your new one should arrive in a few days. Just come home and I'll give you some cash for the jacket." When I got home, he handed me $40. "That should be plenty for a jacket on sale," he said. I found one at a discount store that fit okay but wasn't what I'd wanted. When I showed it to him, he nodded approvingly. "That's a much better choice than spending too much on something frivolous." My mother wore the same coat for 15 years. Quality over vanity. The new debit card never arrived. When I asked about it, Richard said he'd handle it, then later said the bank must have lost it in the mail and he'd reorder it. After that conversation happened 3 times, I realized he wasn't going to give me access to our account. But by then, I felt too embarrassed to push harder. I started using the cash he gave me for groceries each week, carefully counting out change and putting back items if I came up short. In April, Carol called to remind me about our trip to Nashville that we'd been planning for a year. She and Susan had already booked their hotels, and she wanted to coordinate our tickets to the Grand Ole Opry. I was excited until I mentioned it to Richard that evening. "Nashville?" he said. looking up from his newspaper. "When were you going to discuss this with me?" "I told you about it when we first started dating," I said. "Carol, Susan, and I have been planning this for years. It's just a long weekend in May." "And how much is this trip going to cost?" I told him the estimated amount, and he shook his head. "That's a lot of money for 3 days of entertainment. My mother always said that women who traveled without their husbands were looking for trouble. She never took a trip without my father." "Richard, these are my best friends. We've been planning this forever." "I'm not saying you can't go," he said, but his tone suggested otherwise. "I'm just saying it seems like a lot of money to spend when we're trying to be financially responsible. But you do what you think is right." He went back to his newspaper, and the room felt cold. That night I lay awake thinking about how disappointed Carol and Susan would be, but also about how Richard had looked at me, not angry, just sad and hurt. The next morning, I called Carol and told her I couldn't go. Her silence on the other end of the phone call hurt worse than Richard's disapproval. "Is everything okay?" she finally asked. "You sound different." "I'm fine," I said, too brightly. "Richard and I just have a lot going on here. You and Susan should still go and have a wonderful time." After I hung up, Richard came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "I know that was hard," he murmured. "But you made the mature choice. My mother used to say that marriage means putting your spouse first, even when it's difficult." I nodded, blinking back tears, telling myself he was right. Carol called a few more times over the next weeks, and then the calls tapered off. Richard was always around when the phone rang, and he'd raise his eyebrows if I talked too long. "Your friends seem to need a lot of attention," he'd say after I hung up. My mother had friends, but she knew when to prioritize her family over gossip sessions. I started letting calls go to voicemail, then returning them only when Richard was out, keeping them brief and light, never admitting that anything was wrong. In May, I missed book club for the first time in 12 years. Richard said he wasn't feeling well and needed me home. The next month, I missed it again because Richard had scheduled a dinner with his Rotary Club friends and wanted me there. When Susan called to ask if everything was okay, Richard was standing right behind me. "Of course everything's okay," I said, my voice bright and false. "I've just been busy. You know how it is." After I hung up, Richard kissed the top of my head. "You don't need that book club anymore," he said. "You have me to talk to about books. And honestly, some of the things you told me about what goes on there, all that gossiping and complaining about their husbands, it's not the kind of environment my mother would have approved of for a married woman." I hadn't told him about any gossiping or complaining. We just discussed books and sometimes shared what was happening in our lives. But maybe I'd mentioned something and forgotten. I was getting forgetful lately, or at least Richard said I was. He'd tell me I'd agreed to something and I had no memory of it, or he'd remind me of a conversation I couldn't recall. "You need to start writing things down like my mother did," he'd say gently. She kept detailed notes about everything so she never forgot. By June, I wasn't seeing Carol or Susan at all. I'd made excuses for long enough that they'd stopped calling. When Emily came to visit in July, I was so excited I could barely stand it. But the 3 days she spent with us felt strained and strange. Richard monopolized every conversation, correcting stories I told about Emily's childhood, suggesting better ways to spend the time we had together, commenting on what Emily ordered at restaurants. "You sure you want all those carbs?" he said when she ordered pasta. "Your mother and I are trying to eat healthier. We don't want to be a burden on you when we're older." Emily shot me a look I couldn't quite read. On her last evening, when Richard went to bed early, she sat next to me on the couch. "Mom," she said carefully, "are you happy?" "Of course," I said automatically. "Why wouldn't I be? You just seem smaller somehow, quieter. And the way Richard talks to you, it's like—" She paused, searching for words. "It's like you're not there, like you're just supposed to nod and agree with everything." "That's not true," I said, but my voice wavered. "He's just particular about certain things. And he's probably right most of the time. He's very smart." "So are you, Mom. You taught second grade for 35 years. You've read more books than almost anyone I know. You don't need someone telling you how to cut vegetables or what shows to watch." I felt tears prick my eyes. "You don't understand. Marriage is about compromise. His mother," Emily interrupted, "is dead." And from everything you've told me, she sounds like she was a controlling person who raised a controlling son. I'm worried about you." "Well, don't be," I said, and I heard Richard's sharpness in my own voice. "I'm 62 years old. I know what I'm doing." Emily left the next morning with hurt in her eyes, and I spent an hour crying in the bathroom before composing myself enough to face Richard at breakfast. He asked why I was red-eyed, and I said it was just sad to see Emily go. He nodded sympathetically. "I understand," he said, "but you can't let your daughter make you feel guilty for living your own life. My mother always said that children need to learn to let their parents be happy without them." In August, I got a call from the animal shelter where I'd volunteered for 3 years. They were short-staffed and wondering if I could come in a few hours a week. I loved working there, walking the dogs, playing with the cats, helping process adoptions. Before I could answer, Richard took the phone from my hand. "I'm sorry, but my wife won't be able to volunteer anymore," he said into the receiver. "We have a lot of commitments and she's needed at home. I'm sure you understand." He hung up before I could protest. "Why did you do that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Because you're running yourself ragged trying to please everyone," he said. "My mother always said that a woman who doesn't respect her own time teaches others not to respect it either. You need to focus on what's important. Our home, our life together. But I loved volunteering there. Did you? Or did you love having an excuse to avoid being home with me?" His voice was soft, but the words cut deep. "Is that it? You'd rather clean up after dogs than spend time with your husband?" "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean? Because it sounds like you're saying our marriage isn't enough for you." "My mother managed a house, raised me, and supported my father without needing constant outside stimulation. She understood what commitment meant." I felt the walls closing in. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "You're right. I should focus more on us." He smiled and pulled me into a hug that felt more like a restraint than a comfort. "There's my good wife," he murmured. "I know it's hard sometimes, but I'm only trying to help you be your best self, just like my mother helped my father." By September, I rarely left the house except to buy groceries, and even that was becoming difficult. Richard insisted on seeing the receipt for every purchase and questioning any item he deemed unnecessary. "Strawberries?" he'd say. "They're out of season and overpriced." My mother never bought produce out of season. Or ice cream? "We don't need desserts in this house." My mother believed in discipline when it came to food. I lost 12 pounds that summer, not because I was trying to, but because I'd started skipping meals. Food felt like a battleground, and it was easier not to eat than to face criticism. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My clothes hung loose, my face looked drawn, but Richard said I looked better than ever. "You're finally getting rid of that middle-aged spread," he said. My mother always said that women who let themselves go after marriage were showing disrespect to their husbands. I stopped answering the phone entirely. When Carol showed up at my door in October, I almost didn't open it. She looked at me through the screen door with alarm. "Oh my God," she said. "What happened to you?" "Nothing happened to me. I'm fine." "You're not fine. You look exhausted and you've lost so much weight. When was the last time you saw a doctor?" "I don't need a doctor. Can I come in? Can we just talk?" Richard appeared behind me. "Is there something I can help you with?" he asked Carol, his voice polite but cold. "I just wanted to see my friend." "Well, you've seen her. As you can tell, she's perfectly fine. She's just been focusing on her health and her marriage, which is what mature adults do. Now, if you'll excuse us, we were in the middle of something." He closed the main door before I could say anything else, leaving Carol standing on the other side of the screen. I heard her voice through the door. "I'm still your friend. Call me when you're ready." "You won't be calling her," Richard said firmly. "That woman is a negative influence. She's jealous because she's alone and you're not. My mother taught me to recognize people like that. People who claim to be your friends, but really just want to drag you down to their level. But Carol's been my friend for 30 years. And what has she done for you except encourage you to waste money on trips and waste time on gossip? Real friends support your marriage. They don't try to create problems where none exist." I wanted to argue, but I was so tired. Tired of being wrong, tired of defending myself, tired of the constant corrections and comparisons to a dead woman I'd never met but who apparently did everything perfectly. I went to bed at 7 that night and slept for 12 hours, waking up feeling emptier than I had the night before. The panic attacks started in November. The first one hit me in the frozen food aisle of the grocery store. My chest tightened, my vision blurred, and I couldn't catch my breath. I had to abandon my cart and sit on a bench outside until the feeling passed. I didn't tell Richard. The second one came a week later while I was vacuuming the living room. Richard had pointed out that I'd missed a spot behind the couch. My mother vacuumed in a specific pattern to make sure she never missed anything, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. I locked myself in the bathroom until it passed, then came out and apologized for taking so long. By December, I was having chest pain several times a week, sharp, stabbing sensations that made me stop whatever I was doing. I'd press my hand to my ribs and breathe slowly until it eased. Richard noticed once and asked if I was okay. When I mentioned the pain, he frowned. "It's probably stress," he said. "My mother used to say that women who couldn't handle the simple duties of running a household would manifest physical symptoms. You need to relax more, stop worrying about small things." But every small thing felt enormous. Loading the dishwasher, because there was a right way and a wrong way, and if I did it wrong, Richard would silently rearrange everything with a disappointed look on his face. Making the bed, because the corners had to be tucked military tight like his mother had done. Planning meals, because I had to consider his preferences, his mother's recipes, the cost of every ingredient, and whether he'd approve of my choices. Existing in my own house had become an exercise in anticipating and meeting someone else's expectations, and I was failing constantly. On a Thursday afternoon in early January, I was standing in the checkout line at the grocery store, watching the total climb on the register screen. I'd tried so hard to stay within budget, putting back items, choosing store brands, avoiding anything Richard might question. But the total was still higher than the cash I had in my wallet. The cashier was looking at me expectantly. The people behind me in line were getting impatient. My chest tightened. The pain was different this time, heavier, more persistent, radiating down my left arm. The store lights seemed too bright. I heard myself say, "I'm sorry, I need to," and then the floor was rushing up to meet me. I woke up in an ambulance. A paramedic was taking my blood pressure and asking me questions. Could I tell her my name? Did I know what day it was? Was I experiencing any pain? I tried to answer, but my voice wouldn't work properly. Through the open doors of the ambulance, I could see Richard talking to another paramedic. "She's been working too hard in the garden," I heard him say. "I keep telling her to slow down, but she doesn't listen. She's very stubborn that way." I hadn't been in the garden in months. It was January. There was snow on the ground. The emergency room was chaos and bright lights and people asking questions. They hooked me up to machines, drew blood, did an EKG. A young doctor with kind eyes told me I'd had a stress-induced cardiac event. Not a full heart attack, but a serious warning sign. My blood pressure was dangerously high. I was severely underweight. I showed signs of chronic stress and malnutrition. He asked me about my diet, my exercise, my life at home. I gave vague answers, aware that Richard was right outside the curtain, probably listening to every word. Then a woman in her 40s appeared, introducing herself as Linda, a social worker attached to the ER. She pulled the curtain fully around my bed and sat down close to me, speaking quietly. "The doctor is concerned about some things he's seeing," she said. "And I've been doing this job for 15 years. So I'm going to ask you something directly, and I want you to know that whatever you tell me stays between us unless you want it shared. Are you safe at home?" The question hung in the air. I started to say yes, of course, everything was fine. But Linda's eyes were steady and patient, and something in me cracked. "I don't know," I whispered. "He doesn't hit me or anything like that. He's always right about everything. And I'm always wrong. And I'm so tired of being wrong." Linda nodded slowly. "Tell me about a typical day." So I did. I told her about the comparisons to his mother, the financial control, the loss of my friends, the constant corrections, the fear of making mistakes, the feeling that I was disappearing inside my own life. The words tumbled out like water from a broken dam, and once I started, I couldn't stop. Linda listened, occasionally asking gentle questions, taking notes. When I finally ran out of words, she reached over and took my hand. "What you're describing," she said carefully, is a pattern of coercive control and emotional abuse. It's serious, and it's real, even though there's no physical violence. The chest pain, the panic attacks, the weight loss, these are your body's way of telling you that something is deeply wrong. But he loves me, I said weakly. He married me. He takes care of things. Control isn't love, Linda said, and taking over someone's life isn't taking care of them. I need to ask you, do you want to go home with him today? The question terrified me, but the answer was immediate and clear. No, I said. I don't think I do. Linda squeezed my hand. Okay, then we're going to make a plan. While I was kept for observation, Linda spoke to the doctor, who admitted me overnight for additional cardiac monitoring. She also called someone from a domestic violence advocacy organization who came to talk to me about options. The advocate, a woman named Patricia, explained that what I was experiencing had a name: coercive control, and it was a recognized form of domestic violence even without physical abuse. She gave me pamphlets about warning signs, resources for help, and information about protective orders. But I'm 62 years old, I said, feeling stupid. Isn't this something that happens to younger women? Abuse doesn't have an age limit, Patricia said firmly. And sometimes it's harder for older women because people assume you should know better, or because you've been taught that marriage vows mean staying no matter what. But you don't have to stay in a situation that's killing you. Killing me. That's what it was doing, slowly but surely. I thought about the person I'd been 2 years ago. Confident, social, independent, excited about retirement and all the possibilities it held. I thought about the person I'd become. Small, silent, anxious, afraid to make a decision about what to eat for dinner without permission. I thought about Richard standing in the ER waiting room, telling medical professionals that I'd been working in the garden when there was no garden to work in, constructing a narrative that made my collapse my own fault, my own failure. When a nurse finally let Richard in to see me, he rushed to my bedside, looking appropriately concerned. But I caught something else in his expression, a calculation, a wariness. "What did you tell them?" he asked quietly once the nurse left. "The truth," I said, and my voice was stronger than it had been in months. I told them about the chest pains, the stress, all of it. His face went pale. Actually pale, the color draining away as he stared at me. "You shouldn't have done that," he said. "They'll get the wrong idea. They'll think," he stopped, realizing he was about to say the quiet part out loud. "They'll think what? That you're controlling? Because you are. They'll think I'm being emotionally abused? Because I am. Don't be ridiculous," he said, but his voice shook. "I've been trying to help you. Everything I've done has been for your own good. My mother." "Your mother," I interrupted, "is dead. And I'm not her replacement. I'm not a project for you to manage. I'm a person." He started to reply, but Linda appeared at the doorway. "Visiting hours are over," she said firmly, though I was sure that wasn't actually true. "The patient needs rest." Richard opened his mouth to argue, but something in Linda's stance must have communicated that she wasn't going to budge. He left, but not before leaning down to whisper in my ear, "We'll talk about this when you come home." "I'm not coming home," I said clearly, loudly enough that Linda heard. "Not to stay." The look on his face was equal parts shock, rage, and something that might have been fear. He straightened up, adjusted his jacket, and walked out without another word. I spent that night in the hospital, hooked up to monitors, drifting in and out of sleep. Every time I woke, I felt a bit more clear-headed, like fog was slowly lifting. By morning, I knew what I needed to do. Linda came back with Patricia, and together they helped me make a plan. I would not go back to the house while Richard was there. Patricia's organization could provide temporary emergency housing if needed, but Linda had a better suggestion. She called Carol. I hadn't spoken to Carol in 4 months. When Linda handed me the phone, I didn't know what to say. "Carol?" I managed. "It's me." "Oh, thank God," Carol breathed. "Where are you? What happened?" I gave her the basics, the chest pain, the hospital, the realization. "I need help," I said, and saying it out loud felt like breaking through concrete. "I need to leave Richard, and I don't know how." "You tell me where you are," Carol said immediately, "and Susan and I will be there in 20 minutes, and then you're coming to stay with me for as long as you need. No arguments. They arrived in 15 minutes. Carol took one look at me in the hospital bed and burst into tears. Susan, always more practical, just grabbed my hand and held it tight. "We've got you," she said. "We've been waiting for you to let us." Linda and Patricia helped coordinate everything. The police escorted me to my house with a protection order so I could collect some clothes and essentials while Richard was required to stay off the property. He stood at the end of the driveway, watching with his arms crossed as Carol and Susan helped me pack bags. I took my clothes, my photographs of Emily, some books that had belonged to my mother, and the box of letters Emily had sent me over the years. I didn't take anything Richard had given me. As we were loading the car, Richard called out, "You'll be back," he said. "You can't manage without me. You don't even know how to balance a checkbook properly." I stopped and turned to face him. "I taught elementary school for 35 years, I said clearly. "I managed a classroom of 25 students, coordinated with parents and administrators, planned curricula, and helped shape hundreds of young minds. I bought and maintained a house on my own. I balanced my finances just fine before you decided I couldn't. And I'll figure it out again without you." His face contorted with anger, but I didn't wait to hear his response. I got in Carol's car and we drove away. The next weeks were difficult in ways I hadn't anticipated. I stayed with Carol in her cheerful condo, and she treated me with incredible gentleness, like I was something fragile that might break. Which, honestly, I was. I saw a therapist who specialized in abuse recovery. I met with a lawyer about divorce. I worked with a cardiologist to get my heart health back on track. I started eating regular meals again, though food still felt complicated. The hardest part was unlearning all the rules Richard had imposed. Carol would ask me what I wanted for dinner, and I'd freeze, unable to choose. She'd suggest we watch a movie, and I'd wait for her to pick one, uncomfortable with making a decision. The first time I bought name brand instead of store brand groceries, I stood in the aisle for 10 minutes having a silent argument with Richard's voice in my head before finally putting the items in the cart. But slowly, incrementally, I started to feel like myself again. Carol and I resumed book club, and the other members welcomed me back with hugs and no questions. Susan took me to the animal shelter, and they were thrilled to have me volunteer again. I started calling Emily every week, really talking to her, telling her the truth about what had happened. She flew out to visit in March and spent a week just being with me, and we rebuilt some of what had been broken. The divorce was finalized in June. My lawyer was fierce and thorough. Because I could prove that Richard had systematically controlled my finances and that I'd put my retirement savings into an account he'd then restricted my access to, the judge awarded me my full retirement funds back, plus half of Richard's assets. Most importantly, because the house was solely in my name and Richard had moved into it, it remained mine. Richard fought it, claiming he'd made improvements, and therefore had equity. But the judge wasn't swayed, especially after Linda and Patricia provided statements about the coercive control. I moved back into my house in July, exactly 18 months after the grocery store collapse. Carol and Susan helped me cleanse it, as they called it. We boxed up everything that was Richard's or that reminded me of him, his mother's books, his notebooks, the bland beige pillows he'd insisted matched better than my colorful ones. We donated what we could and threw away the rest. I painted the kitchen a bright sunshine yellow. I planted a garden full of wildflowers that had no organizational system whatsoever. I hung a bird feeder outside the window where I could watch cardinals and finches while I drank my morning coffee. Made exactly as strong as I wanted it. Emily came to visit in August, and this time the visit felt like it should, full of laughter and ease and real conversation. She helped me pick out new dishes to replace the plain white ones Richard had preferred. We cooked dinner together, making mistakes and laughing at them instead of tensing up in fear of criticism. She met Carol and Susan and thanked them for taking care of her mother when she couldn't. "I was so worried," she told them. "I could see something was wrong, but I didn't know how to help." "Neither did we," Carol admitted. "But the important thing is that your mom found her way out. I'm 64 now, 2 years past that day in the grocery store. I still see my therapist twice a month. I still have moments where I catch myself asking permission for things I don't need permission for, or apologizing for having preferences. But those moments are getting fewer and further between. I'm back to my normal weight. My blood pressure is under control. I haven't had a panic attack in over a year. I think about Richard sometimes, and about those 2 years that feel like they happened to someone else. I think about how he wasn't a monster in the obvious ways. He never hit me, never screamed at me, never locked me in a room. But he systematically dismantled my autonomy, my confidence, and my sense of self, always framing it as helping me, as loving me, as showing me the right way to do things. He weaponized his dead mother's memory to create an impossible standard I could never meet, and he did it all while looking like a devoted husband to anyone on the outside. I've learned that abuse doesn't always look like the dramatic scenes we see in movies. Sometimes it looks like someone who loves you too much, who cares too much about helping you improve, who just wants what's best for you even when what's best means erasing who you are. Sometimes it's quiet and insidious, wearing you down day by day until you don't recognize yourself anymore. I've also learned that it's never too late to leave, to ask for help, to reclaim your life. At 62, when I married Richard, I thought I was too old to start over. At 64, I know that starting over isn't about age, it's about courage. And sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is admit that you need help and reach out for it. Carol and Susan are taking me to Nashville next month. We've had the trip rebooked for a year, waiting until I felt ready. I bought my ticket myself, from my own account that only I have access to. I packed a bag with clothes I chose because I like them, not because someone else approved of them. And I'm going to see the Grand Ole Opry with my 2 best friends, and I'm going to have a wonderful time, and I won't feel guilty about a single minute of it. If you're reading this, and something in my story resonates with you, if you see yourself in the person I was, please know, you deserve to take up space. You deserve to make decisions. You deserve to have preferences and opinions, and friends and hobbies, and control over your own money and your own life. Love should make you feel bigger, not smaller. Partnership should be about mutual respect, not one person molding the other into their ideal. And if someone is constantly comparing you to someone else, criticizing your choices, isolating you from support systems, or controlling your finances, that's not love, that's control. You are not too old, not too young, not too set in your ways, not too dependent, not too anything to deserve better. You are not imagining it. You are not overreacting. You are not ungrateful or difficult or wrong. You are a person with inherent worth, and you deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, especially by the person who claims to love you. I got out. You can too. Reach out to a friend, a family member, a domestic violence hotline. The National Domestic Violence Hotline number is 1-800-799-7233, and they can help you create a safety plan, find resources, and remind you that you're not alone. Because you're not. There are people who understand, who care, and who will help you reclaim your life. You are stronger than you know. You are braver than you feel, and somewhere out there, your future self is waiting for you to take that first step toward freedom. She's standing in a kitchen painted sunshine yellow, drinking coffee exactly how she likes it, about to take a trip with her best friends. She's living in a house filled with things she chose, making decisions without fear, taking up all the space she deserves. She's you, and she's waiting.